She had filed the checklist twice. No one acknowledged it. Her request to sit in on the tactical prep was waved off with a joke about training jets and coffee runs, so she stood back, quiet, as the real pilots geared up her aircraft parked behind them, unarmed, unseen. Then the radar lit up. Signals where none should be, timing off by minutes, the QRF grounded, the air corridor wide open. Confusion filled the tent until someone noticed her seat was empty. And then everything changed. What they dismissed as procedural drift became the opening move in a maneuver no one had prepared for, except her. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The wind moved unevenly across the forward airstrip, catching dust in brief spirals between the rows of parked aircraft. The scent of jet fuel and scorched metal clung to the morning heat, held low by the cloud ceiling pressing down over the eastern border. Leah crossed the tarmac with steady pace. Her flight gloves clipped neatly to her belt loop and her helmet tucked under one arm. The olive-green name patch on her chest was faded at the edges. No one looked twice. Around her, the airfield pulsed with coordinated motion. Ground crews guided munitions carts toward the twin F-16s being prepped on Bay 2. Crew chiefs barked sequence numbers while a generator hummed behind the operations tent. Pilots gathered in loose clusters near the folding tables outside the briefing shelter, their helmets off, sleeves rolled, leaning in with coffee cups in hand. One of them, a tall officer with mirrored sunglasses still on, glanced at Leah as she passed and spoke just loud enough to carry. "Shouldn't that Talon be in a museum hangar by now?" Another chuckled and said, "Maybe she's taking it out for a coffee run. Speed limits, what? Mach 0.9. No one corrected them. Leah didn't slow. She reached her aircraft a T-38 Talon, paint dulled from years of sun and salt. The slim delta wings looked narrow compared to the broad shoulders of the strike fighters surrounding it. It sat apart, unarmed, unimportant. She ran a gloved hand across the forward intake lip, checking the seal for residue. Her helmet bag rested briefly on the wing root before she slid it into the rear seat. Inside the nearby tent, the mission brief was underway. The escort team was reviewing their route into Quadrant Charlie, tracking a convoy signal that had been flagged for airborne coverage. Two pilots from Echo Flight leaned against a monitor stand as the screen cycled through projected altitude bands. Someone asked about intercept latency on the left vector, and the squadron lead muttered, "It's fine. We've got teeth in the air today. No need for toys." Through the half-open flap, Leah stood just visible at the edge of their view. No one called her in. She wasn't on the board. Colonel Dean Rains stood near the whiteboard, arms crossed, chin tilted slightly toward the topographical overlay. He caught sight of Leah for a second, then looked back to the screen and spoke to the room without turning. "Non-tactical assets will stand down until further routing is finalized. That includes Talon 29er, maintenance ferry only." A couple of heads nodded without looking up. Someone near the back added, "No offense, but if she's leading the defense, I'm calling my mother." Leah opened the T-38's access panel and adjusted a trim indicator. Her terrain file, a personal chart layered from old AWACS echoes and archived low-altitude telemetry, remained folded in her flight folder, untouched. She didn't take it out. A junior controller emerged from the tent holding a tablet and stopped halfway toward her. "Lieutenant, you're not cleared on today's manifest. Should be an afternoon reposition." "Yeah." His tone wasn't cruel, just efficient. Leah nodded once and said, "Copy." He turned back without waiting for more. Far off in the operations shelter, one of the AWACS screens flickered, then recalibrated. A technician tapped the screen twice, frowned, then logged the movement as a false echo, a telemetry artifact, not a priority. The F-16s rolled into taxi hold, their engine growl rising in synchronized pitch. Leah stood by the T-38's wing, watching nothing in particular, boots still in line with the shadow of her aircraft. The chatter faded behind her. Her gloves stayed clipped, unmoved. She reached up, sealed the canopy, and waited. Inside the maintenance hangar, the hum of fluorescent lights cut through the silence like static over a headset. Leah moved along the left wing of the T-38, fingers tracing each panel line without needing to consult the checklist. The aircraft rested in stall 3, away from the strike fighters lined outside under tensioned tarp. No one had followed her inside. The pre-flight log on the wall terminal still read empty. She opened the avionics bay and ran a manual integrity check. No alerts. No red flags. But she didn't rely on the alerts. She pulled a flash drive from her belt pouch and loaded a terrain profile into the nav console, overriding the default route with a map she had assembled herself. The corridor it outlined was narrow, carved between radar nulls and wind shear pockets, built from months of archived telemetry and handwritten AWACS dumps. She'd printed the last version just 2 weeks ago and inked in new annotations the night prior wind drift near the southern ridge, potential reflection off the frozen basin, temperature inversion readings at dawn. No one had asked her to build it. No one had looked. She tapped through the T-38's performance profile, running wind tunnel projections from past sims, crosswinds at 60 knots, altimeter sync delay, engine response curve under rapid pitch. Her eyes moved quickly. Her hands stayed steady. She made 3 notes on a spare slip of paper and tucked it behind the panel for later reference. The flight log would show nothing. Her adjustments weren't logged because no one would request the data. To her left, the sim console by the wall stood dark. She had used it most evenings, keying in her own drills after shift terrain masking, radar bounce tests, low visibility throttle transitions. The air defense certification that should have followed her training had been frozen after a software dispute with the doctrine chief 2 years ago. She had flagged a procedural exploit that invalidated a low visibility targeting run. Her logic was sound. The response had been administrative silence. Now she studied real corridors instead. She moved to the cockpit and powered the nav suite into diagnostic mode. Outside the canopy, the hangar doors remained half open, casting a strip of white sunlight across the forward edge of the floor. The T-38's shadow split cleanly through it. She toggled the weather overlay and watched thermal stacks form on the display. Ground heat was rising faster than expected. Atmospheric pressure was falling slightly east of Vector 90. She remembered the Doppler pattern from a field report last quarter. It had the same shape-tight band, then drift, then static recapture. She cross-referenced the satellite telemetry from that morning. Radar noise on the western grid had registered 4 signals. Early, almost too early for timing protocol. They were dismissed as anomalies by the ops channel and marked in yellow on the tracking board. One of them, however, had looped a pattern that didn't fit any training echo. It resembled a lead scout vector. Fast in, slow turn, repeat at distance. Leah adjusted the T-38's power settings to simulate that same angle, running the projection silently against the canyon elevation chart. The result wasn't obvious, but it was there. She leaned back in the seat and ran a silent count 18 seconds from intercept vector to visual contact if they kept current airspeed. The base had no cover fighters airborne. The quick reaction force was grounded for fuel rotation. She checked again to be sure. On the far end of the nav bay, the board listed 5 planned launches, all tactical, all delayed by weather and staffing shuffle. Her name wasn't on the board. Her aircraft wasn't scheduled for anything except repositioning to Depot 4. She slid the terrain printout from her folder and laid it across the knee panel. The paper had soft creases at the folds, and the ink along the southern edge had bled slightly from where her gloves had rested the night before. Each data point was hers. No simulators had logged this. No team had mapped it. It was her pattern, her logic, her risk. Outside, the hangar light shifted as the sun cleared a lower bank of clouds. The canopy caught the light and sent a brief flare across the hangar ceiling. Leah blinked once. Then she sealed the folder and locked it back into place. She would wait for no order. The pattern was already forming. The operations tent smelled like warm plastic and cold coffee. Leah stood near the back wall, helmet in hand. As Colonel Dean Raines reviewed the latest radar activity, The AWACS screen showed 3 brief signal bursts from the northwestern vector, then a fourth with a tighter loop. One of the comm officers flagged it as a pattern mismatch. Rains rubbed a thumb against his temple and spoke without looking away from the screen. Echoes, atmospheric stacking, probably a drift pulse from last night's pass. Leah stepped forward. Her voice was steady. The fourth pass repeated an intercept curve. That's not stacking. Rains glanced toward her with polite disinterest. We're not authorizing a response on phantom telemetry. F-16s are still in fuel hold. We'll wait for a second confirmation. No air assets up until that happens. Leah didn't argue. She nodded once, stepped back, and left the tent without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing loose sand across the tarmac and curling dust against the wheels of grounded aircraft. The sky was flat gray, the light diffused, shadows cut short. The T-38 sat alone in stall 3, nose pointed toward the far runway. A thin layer of grit had gathered along the trailing edge of the wing. Leah reached into her chest pocket and pulled out the folded flight card. She hadn't written the mission block or comm channel. She left those blank. She folded the paper once more and slid it under the nav panel inside the cockpit. Her gloves, clipped to her belt, since morning pratam, were pulled on in one smooth motion. The terrain corridor file was already loaded into the onboard system. She keyed in altitude parameters and manually set a radar silence mode below 1,000 feet. The screen acknowledged with a single green check. She moved through startup fast but methodically. Battery check, fuel pump prime, circuit breakers confirmed, oxygen test good, hydraulic pressure rising. Outside, no one moved toward her. The hangar crew was preoccupied with an engine recheck on the F-16s. A forklift beeped twice behind the supply tent and vanished into the frame. No one was watching the Talon. Leah sealed the canopy. The glass locked with a clean hiss. At the tower, a comm-tech noticed the lights activate on stall 3. He leaned into the mic and raised his voice. Talon 29er, you're not cleared to taxi. Repeat, stall 3 is not cleared for movement. Leah rolled forward. The ground crew chief by the fueling rack turned just in time to see the jet pass him. He waved once, then lowered his hand. Unsure. At the end of the taxiway, Leah brought the engines to idle and aligned with runway vector 22. Her heart was calm. The headset crackled again. Talon 29er, confirm call sign. You are not scheduled. Return to stall. She keyed her mic once without speaking. The system logged the pulse but no response. Throttle forward. Airspeed alive. The Talon rose off the runway in a shallow climb, wheels retracting just as the end of the strip blurred beneath her. She dipped the nose and dropped low, hugging the terrain as the ground folded into shallow hills and brush-lined ridges. Her eyes stayed on the corridor-sharp turns, then flattening, then a dip where the canyon opened. Every movement matched her map. At radar station Delta, the technician blinked at the screen as the T-38's transponder vanished from grid. He ran a quick refresh. Did we just lose a signal off the strip? The senior controller shook his head. Not tracked. Probably a ghost ping. No authorized launch. Inside the cockpit, Leah stayed just above the trees. Flaps trimmed for clean airflow. Speed climbing past 400 knots. The terrain wall on her left offered natural masking. To her right, the riverbed ran cold and shallow, flat enough to reflect signal scatter. She threaded the space between without speaking. AWACS did not register her on the feed. There was no call sign in the log, no flight code on the manifest. Her aircraft was not listed as active. And yet, the T-38 flew, off the grid, low and silent, into the corridor only she had prepared. The canyon ahead narrowed into a hard-angled bend, its walls streaked with snow crust and shadow. Leah stayed just under the ridgeline, her T-38 angled in a shallow right bank. Throttle nudged forward but not maxed. She kept her speed just under 500 knots. Enough to stay ahead of any heat-seek or radar lock but below the trigger for thermal bloom. Her canopy glass trembled faintly with the wind pressure. The nav display pulsed green with terrain overlays. Every peak and curve familiar, rehearsed. To her left, The sun struck the canyon edge at a shallow angle, bouncing hard glare off the ice-crusted basin floor. She shifted 5 degrees starboard, letting the light angle between her tail and the ridgeline, forming a natural visual disruption behind her. The radar pings had returned, 2 faint signals trailing her on a spread pattern, one low, one higher up. She had no countermeasures, no backup. The comms stayed silent. She pulled the nose low and dipped over the riverbed, where snow dust lined the banks. As she cut over the surface, she adjusted the trim to stir turbulence behind her. The T-38's exhaust threw up a column of vapor, just enough to mimic a flare burst. One of the pursuing fighters flinched. Its signal shifted slightly on her display, a hesitation. She banked left into a tighter channel, where the rock walls rose near vertical. The sound dampened. Echoes folded into themselves. Here, even full radar sweep would scatter and return useless. The perfect pocket. On her second pass through the V-shaped terrain fold, Leah dropped altitude another 70 feet. The trees near the cliff base blurred into vertical green smears. She toggled her beacon briefly, not to transmit, but to throw a quick pulse into the upper atmosphere enough to look like a signal loss or a crash reflection. One of the fighters accelerated, overshooting her position and climbing hard, thinking she had hit terrain. The other stayed behind her, still cautious. She kept the T-38 low, using the terrain's shape to manipulate his path. The canyon widened just ahead, leading into a broad frozen shelf with old lake markings. She knew this space. The sun would flash across the ice, creating radar bloom. She flew straight into it. The glare hit hard. The pursuer's signal wavered. She made a shallow climb, just enough to register briefly on the horizon. A bluff move, a bait profile. She knew the delay, knew exactly when the third fighter still high above would loop around to try and box her in. He would assume she was rising to escape. He would expect a vertical pull. Instead, Leah inverted and dove back into the lower channel, slicing through a notch no wider than 70 feet. The G-force tugged her arms down. Her helmet pulled against the harness strap. She let the aircraft fall into the fold of the rocks, using the speed from the fake climb to cut a reverse angle. The snow along the cliffs exploded into mist as she passed. The 2 enemy jets now trailed in loose formation, stretched from the diversion. One was too high, one was too slow, both now outside coordinated range. At that moment, the upper edge of her display flashed, a separate radar source. No ID tag, but she knew the shape. The F-16s had launched. They were approaching from the southwest, coming in hot and low, silent on all channels. She looped wide across the lakebed and let the T-38 skim the edge, right wingtip barely meters above the surface. The wind resistance pushed back against her, but the aircraft held. As she exited the basin, she tapped the trim and eased the nose up, just enough to bleed speed. She did not engage. She did not signal. The enemy fighters came into open space just as the F-16s crested the ridge behind them. There was no warning, no shots, no dogfight, just sudden radar proximity from a faster, better-armed threat. The 2 enemy jets broke formation immediately, scattering in opposite directions. The high one banked and fled north. The lower one dropped chaff and turned south, disappearing into open sky. Leah stayed on the edge of the canyon, throttle steady, eyes on the retreating blips. Her comms remained off. One of the F-16s transmitted a marker ping, logging final vectors. No pursuit was ordered, no engagement necessary. The corridor was clear. She let the T-38 climb gradually out of the masking terrain. The valley gave way to open sky. Blue spread across the canopy glass. Her flight path, once secret, now carried the signature of completion. No one hailed her. The AWACS feed would show no transmission. There would be no logged victory, no tactical debrief with her name on it. But the grid was stable. The intercept window had held. Above her, the contrails of the F-16s faded into pale arcs. Below her, the canyon walls grew smaller and fell away. Leah adjusted her throttle to cruise. Her hands rested calmly on the stick. Ahead, The cloud ceiling opened. She climbed toward it. The climb out of the canyon was steady, controlled, and nearly silent. Leah adjusted the throttle incrementally, easing the T-38 through the layered air above the shelf basin. Below her, the snow-dusted ridgelines gave way to open foothills, and the echoes of wind between stone walls faded into static over the headset. She did not speak. Her comm remained off. No radar lock. No transponder return. Only clean sky and the residual vapor trail of her low-flight pass cutting a diagonal seam through the cold. She leveled off at 12,000 feet. Engine temperature holding just under optimal, wings trimmed for neutral balance. Ahead, the sun caught the edge of her canopy, washing the cockpit in a pale white haze. She kept the heading straight, letting the terrain pass beneath her like a quiet tide. Her flight profile flattened, unarmed, unmarked. She could see nothing behind her but the faint shimmer of heat where the corridor had closed. Elsewhere, the F-16s banked wide from their intercept vector, one looping low along the canyon mouth, the other circling above in a shallow spiral. Their radar sweeps confirmed rapid enemy retreat, no lock-ons, no air-to-air engagement, just sudden separation and withdrawal. The fighters had fled before a shot was fired. From the lead F-16, the pilot's voice cracked through to the AWACS channel with a clipped update. He reported 2 bogies splitting under pressure. No aggression postures. No missile cue. They'd seen something unexpected and broke formation. He didn't understand what triggered it. There had been no forward alert. No squadron designation. No electronic warfare support. Something had spooked them. Back at the command center, the air inside the operations tent shifted. The screens glowed in green and amber, status bars updating second by second. Colonel Dean Raines stood behind the main console, arms crossed, watching the AWACS playback in loop. One of the analysts rewound the radar feed to the moment just before the enemy jets split. On the lower quadrant of the display, a third signal appeared, small and sharp, threading directly beneath the primary radar net. It had not originated from a designated launch slot. It carried no mission code. It flew untagged. "Zoom in," Raines said quietly. The analyst tapped the console, and the radar print expanded. The small blip tracked through the canyon for just under 6 minutes, then rose, leveled, and exited the grid at altitude. The transponder was silent for most of the run, returning only as it neared the southern edge of the patrol sector. "That's not a drone," the analyst said. "Signature's too clean. Twin engine. High-speed climb profile." Another controller leaned in. "It came from the forward strip. Stall 3. That's the Talon." Across the tent, someone retrieved the launch manifest and ran down the list of cleared aircraft. The T-38 was listed for reposition only. It had no flight block, no crew sign-off, and no comms record. The launch field was blank. A junior officer turned from his screen. "There's no pilot of record." Colonel Raines looked at the display again. The blip had already vanished beyond grid range, replaced by the patrol sweep of the returning F-16s. He watched the segment twice more, noting the timing. From first radar contact to enemy disengagement, the entire sequence lasted 8 minutes. The T-38 had held the corridor for nearly 6. Then a voice came through from the translator's desk, reading from intercepted open-band chatter logged as the hostile aircraft exited airspace. One of the enemy pilots had spoken over his outbound frequency. The translator read it flatly. "We chased a ghost. It wasn't a fighter. It was bait." Raines said nothing. He reached for the tablet beside the screen and brought up the local flight log. The T-38 was now pinging on base radar. It had re-entered range at altitude, tracking low approach and returning from the south without incident. The analyst beside him spoke again, more carefully this time. "Who flew that jet?" No one answered. Outside the tent, the first F-16 touched down on the runway, brakes flaring into a soft wisp of steam as it slowed. The second followed 2 minutes later. On the far side of the airstrip, the T-38 made its descent, unhurried, quiet, landing gear deployed cleanly. It rolled across the tarmac without escort, taxiing past the fuel depot and turning toward its original hangar. Colonel Rains turned from the screen and looked out through the open flap toward the aircraft moving alone in the distance. His expression was unreadable. A voice near the back of the tent spoke under breath. Not a question, just a recognition. She took the jet with no weapons and won. The wheels touched down with a light shudder, rubber meeting concrete in a clean, aligned landing. Leah guided the T-38 across the runway without deviation, keeping her speed low as the canopy glass caught the early slant of sunlight. The base was stirring now. Shadows, moving near the fuel depot. Silhouettes pacing beside the control shack. She passed the F-16 bays without glancing toward them. A few heads turned in her direction. Slow and uncertain. No one waved her in. No marshaller stepped forward. She taxied without guidance. Near the corner of the flight line, two techs stood beside a hydraulic cart. One adjusted his headset. The other, barely more than a trainee, stared openly at the incoming jet. He nudged his elbow toward the older man, eyes still fixed on the nose of the T-38. His voice was low. That wasn't a recon flight. Leah turned off the taxi lights and brought the aircraft to a stop beside stall 3. She ran the shutdown sequence by touch. Engine flow down, battery disengaged, cabin pressure equalized. Her gloves were already unclipped, folded once and tucked into the side of her helmet bag. She didn't speak as she opened the canopy. The ground was cool beneath her boots. The wind had dropped since morning, leaving only the sound of distant compressors and metal clatter behind the maintenance sheds. She climbed down from the ladder and reached back to secure the cockpit latch, pausing once to catch the sun glinting across the canopy glass. It flared white for a second, then faded. Across the ramp, the fuel team for Echo Flight paused their prep. One of them, kneeling beside a hose coupler, watched her for a moment longer than necessary. The flight log station nearby sat unattended. The screen showed aircraft return pings, time-stamped by grid sector. Her jet's code had reappeared on the map, tagged by tail number only. No call sign, no mission type, no debrief trigger. Inside the command tent, Colonel Dean Rains leaned over the primary console. The AWACS replay rolled again on the main monitor. A junior officer beside him flipped between segments, trying to locate any pre-launch authorization. There was none. The pilot block for the T-38 showed a dash, no entry. The line remained open. Rains said nothing at first. Then he spoke in a quiet voice, more observation than accusation. Who authorized this? The officer hesitated, fingers still resting on the edge of the tablet. He looked at the empty field, then back at the radar trail Leah had carved through the corridor. She didn't wait to be... Rains didn't answer. He let the screen continue playing, watching the timing align across all 4 radar feeds. The enemy pullout, the intercept hold, the retreat, all of it fell behind her signal. Outside, Leah walked past the edge of the tarmac toward the side hangar. She did not look around. No one called to her. She stepped through the open side door and disappeared from view. A minute later, she emerged in the tool bay, hair pulled back, jacket loosened. Her helmet sat on a shelf beside the inspection tags. She picked up the clipboard from the maintenance post, scanning the morning schedule. Hydraulic line rechecks on stall 6. Exhaust plate adjustment on stall 2. Refuel monitoring for Juliet 4. She marked her name next to stall 2 and set the clipboard back in its mount. Nothing about her posture had changed. Nothing in her expression asked for recognition. She moved with the same quiet precision as before. But no one told her to stand down. And no one called her a coffee runner. Leah never asked for recognition. She did not raise her voice in the briefing tent or challenge the chain of command. She saw what others missed, acted when no one else would, and returned without expectation, alone in the sky, with no weapons and no sanction. She changed the course of a mission simply by trusting what she knew to be true. Her story reminds us that strength does not always arrive with noise or rank. Sometimes it moves quietly through preparation, clarity, and resolve. The kind of courage that flies without permission and lands without applause. If Leah's journey resonated with you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, And if you believe the quietest heroes often carry the greatest weight, consider following for more stories like this, of service, resilience, and the people who stand ready even when no one is watching.